Good evening. Welcome to the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History. Tonight we have a special treat for you. Dr. Chike Akua will be presenting, but first we need to start off in the right way. So we're going to start off with a little drum call from the legendary drum and dance troupe GIWAYEN MATA, who last year celebrated their 25-year anniversary. Well, this is totally unrehearsed, so what comes out, comes out. However, this is a group of gifted drummers and dancers that I've had the pleasure of taking classes with. And so if you never had the experience of seeing and hearing them, then you're definitely in for a treat. So now, let's just go straight into that drum call.
Hello, wonderful people. Hello. I don't want to be hidden behind the podium, but, and maybe Brother Salim is going to hook me up. Thank you, Brother Salim. So the piece that we're playing right now is called Kasa. Everybody say Kasa. Kasa. And with Kasa, we have for you an opportunity to share wisdom. You're going to hear a break. And during that break, it will be a time for you to share something that maybe your mom taught you, or maybe something that your great-grandfather left behind, one of those wisdom nuggets, something that can inspire us, something short and sweet. Like sometimes when you look out on your neighbor's grass, you see that the grass looks green, because grass does look greener when it's on the other side. But think about it. You don't know what they're using for fertilizer. You don't know what tricks they have up their sleeve. So even though the grass looks green, it's not always greener. Anyone? I'll go. You will go. Sure. Some.
You know, I heard a wise person say once, when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are GIWAYEN MATA, the dynamic, soul-stirring, all-sister dance, percussion, and vocal ensemble, specializing in dances, songs, and rhythms of the African diaspora. This evening, we are tickling your fancy with some rhythms of the Malinke people. The first, Kasa. This rhythm is done to encourage the rice farmers to keep working. How many of you ever have a little something that you need encouragement with? Anybody? Okay. Now, in the spirit of Africanness, I want to encourage you all to use your voices, move your bodies, express yourself with your faces. So I'm going to ask that question again. How many of you ever need encouragement in your work? Okay, all right, okay, all right, all right. We're going to continue with a rhythm and dance called Sofa. And this one is done by the warriors, the strong men, the young men, before they go out to fight. We dedicate this to each and every one of you who are going out to fight for the liberation of our people each and every day. How many freedom fighters do we have in the house? Thank you. How many freedom fighters do we have in the house today? And I'm going to ask you one more time. How many freedom fighters do we have in the house today? All right. Please enjoy Sofa.
Okay, so one more time for GIWAYEN MATA. And now I have the pleasure of introducing the speaker for the evening, Dr. Chike Akua. Dr. Chike Akua is a professor of educational leadership at Clark Atlanta University and one of the most sought-after speakers at colleges, universities, educational conferences, and urban schools nationally. Through his research and practice of African-centered education, Dr. Akua has transformed the lives of tens of thousands of people with his riveting and revealing presentations and books. His books, Education for Transformation and Honoring Our Ancestral Obligations, have fast become favorites in the community and on college campuses nationally among students and those who teach and lead them. In his over 25 years in the field of education, Dr. Akua has written 10 books, produced a series of African origins historical DVDs, and 70 Black history and African proverb posters. In addition, through the African Genesis Institute, he has assisted in leading over 1,000 youth and adults to Africa on study tours to Egypt, Ghana, Senegal, and Morocco. Dr. Akua earned his bachelor's degree in education from Hampton University, his master's degree in education and school counseling from Clark Atlanta University, and his doctorate from Georgia State University. He resides just outside of Atlanta with his wife of 25 years and their 2 sons. You can learn more about Dr. Akua at www.drakua.net.
It's 11:59 on the clock of destiny. And life is like a minute, only 60 seconds in it. Forced upon you, can't refuse it. Didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to you to use it. You'll suffer if you lose it, give account if you abuse it. It's only a minute, but eternity is in it. And with that minute, you, me, and we can change and transform the world. Now, if you really believe that we in this room can change and transform the world, would everyone please say Ashe? Ashe. It's got to be stronger than that. Ashe? Ashe. That's better. See, Ashe is a West African word which means I agree. It also means let it be so, but it also represents the activating energy and the presence of the Spirit that is both within us and around us at all times. And so I'm going to be using that word Ashe as a call and response this evening, because when I say something I want you to remember, I'm going to use that word Ashe and have you to repeat it after me. I'm also, when I use that word, if you hear anything that taps your spirit or touches your soul, then you don't have to wait until I say Ashe. You can say Ashe, and that lets me know that we're all on the same page. Ashe? Ashe. All right. Well, let me tell you what an honor, a privilege, and a blessing it is to be here with you this evening. First of all, give yourselves a round of applause, because you could be anywhere this evening. But there's something that told you that you needed to be here today, and we're going to make sure that we make it worth your time and your attention and the energy that it took for you to get here. Ashe? Ashe. All right, so first let me bring you greetings from the Teacher Transformation Institute, where we use standards-based, research-driven, African-centered, and culturally relevant instructional strategies to increase student achievement. And what we do is we teach teachers how to bring out the brilliance in our children. Ashe? Ashe. We know that our children are brilliant, yes? But many of them are in schools and school systems where they're seen as a problem rather than as people. And so we go into schools and school systems and colleges and universities and education conferences, and we teach teachers how to bring out the brilliance in our children. And so we do this work all over the country, but it's good to be here at home in Atlanta where we can share this message. Ashe? Ashe. And so this is a presentation that I'm going to share with you today that I have not necessarily, I've only done this in one school in particular, but hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do more presentations like this one that you're going to receive this evening. What you're going to see this evening is part of a much longer and larger set of presentations that we do. Today we're talking about the ma'afa, reparations, and the debt that's due. But if you know me and you've ever seen me present before, by the way, how many of you have seen me present before? Just put your hand up. Okay, so you know how I flow then, right? So you know I never start our history. I never start our story at our lowest point, Ashe? Even though many textbooks do, even though many other teachers do, we never start a people's story at their lowest point. And so to that end, I want you to know that what you're going to see today is part of a much longer and larger series that we do. We have African sacred science, the black contributions to the STEM areas. We have African origins of our faith. We take it all the way back, thousands of years. We have Majesty of the Moors, the African influence in early Europe, where we talk about how the Moors ruled for almost 800 years in Spain and had an influence throughout all Europe and lifted Europe out of the Dark Ages with their science and technology. Ashe? We also have Wonders of West Africa. And our most recent book and DVD is entitled Honoring Our Ancestral Obligations. So I want you to know we have all sorts of different resources because we couldn't wait for the schools to get it right. Ashe? Now I can say that because I'm a former middle school teacher. And all of these different resources that you saw at my table and that I've just mentioned here are things that were not in the school curricula that I began to develop. And when it first became clear to me that I was to do that, I said, well, man, you know, this information isn't in the curriculum, but it needs to be there. And Spirit whispered in my ear, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? And so I took it upon myself to begin to create these resources to get it back into the hands of our children and our parents. Ashe, if you have your phone this evening, would you hold it up in the air, please? If you have your phone, hold it up in the air. Wave it like you just don't care. No, I'm just kidding. I want you to have that. Make sure it's on silence, but I do want you to know that you're going to see some pictures and images this evening that are very powerful. And what you're going to experience this evening is too powerful to be kept in this room. And so we're going to make this local event a global event. Ashe? We're going to make this local event a what? Global event. So when you see pictures and images on the screen here that you find interesting that other people need to know about, please take a picture and post it to social media. You may even want to get a 1 to 2 minute video clip of something that's going on, but mainly the pictures, I think, will be very helpful for those that aren't here today. Ashe? All right. Now, it is customary when we come together as African people that we begin by giving honor to the Most High, who is known by many names and worshiped in many ways. Certainly the one source and the one force and the one power and the one presence through which we all live, move, and have our being. Ashe? We also give honor to our ancestors because there's an African proverb which says, if we stand tall, it is because we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, or as Dr. Jacob Carruthers has said, indeed our stride is wide because we're walking in the footsteps of giants. Ashe? One of the giants in whose footsteps I'm attempting to walk, one of the giants on whose shoulders I'm attempting to stand tall, is none other than Nana Bafora Amankwechia II, Dr. Asa Hilliard III. And I made him a promise several years ago, as I have with many of the elders in our community who have been laboring, bringing the knowledge to the people for decades. But I made him a promise and I said, we will continue what you have begun. Would you repeat that after me? We will continue what you have begun. And we know he is pleased and his presence is with us today. Ashe? You've heard it said before that a picture is worth what? 1,000 words. And so I have a lot of pictures and images to share with you, but it's not enough to look with your two physical eyes. You have to look with what our ancestors called the ujat. Everybody say ujat. The ujat is the third eye, the eye of all seeing enlightenment that allows us to see beyond the physical realm and into the mental and spiritual dimensions. Even as the great poet Listerville Middleton says, sharpen your eye and tune your ear so you know what you see and understand what you hear. If y'all are ready to get started, everybody say, let's get it. All right, here we go. Well, brothers and sisters, the topic is the ma'afa, reparations, and the debt that's due. The ma'afa, reparations, and the debt that's due. But we have to, before we can really get deep into it, we need to define some terms. And in defining some terms, the first one that comes up is ma'afa. Would you say ma'afa, please? Ma'afa. The definition of ma'afa is, it is the catastrophic interruption of African sovereignty and civilization. Some people refer to it as slavery. But our dear sister, Dr. Marimba Ani, coined this term because she understood that when people think slavery, they think 1619 to 1863 at the end of the Civil War, Ashe, or 1865, Ashe? But her contention is that the Ma'afa is still going on. Do you follow me? And so Ma'afa is a Swahili term which means calamity, catastrophe. And she wanted to situate and center our understanding of this in African terminology. And so it's the catastrophic interruption of African sovereignty and civilization. Some people say slavery is a part of our history. Some people say, no, it interrupted our history. Amen. And so it's the catastrophic interruption of African sovereignty. By sovereignty, we mean that we were recognized and respected around the world as an all-powerful people. We didn't seek permission from anybody else to be ourselves, Ashe? Much as many of us think we have to do that today. So the Ma'afa is the catastrophic interruption of African sovereignty and civilization. It's the unique suffering of African people through the terrorism, everybody say terrorism, the terrorism of lynching and family separation, chattel slavery, where we were treated as animals, segregation. Over 100 million Africans lost their lives. Ashe? Now, the reason I put this word terrorism in here is very, very, very important and instructive. I'll never forget when 9/11 hit, which of course was a terrible tragedy. I was just up in New York this past week and went to the memorial right at Ground Zero. It's a very sobering moment. But when it hit, I was a 7th grade teacher, and Time Magazine would send us these Time magazines for kids every week with activities and lessons of current events. And so when 9/11 hit, I began to get these magazines that began to teach about terrorism. And the lessons about terrorism seemed to focus on people in the quote-unquote Middle East. Ashe? Brown people in the Middle East. And so I had to teach my 7th graders, wait a minute, we need to redefine this word different than Time Magazine was defining it. Are y'all with me? Because who has suffered the greatest terrorism on the planet and who has been the greatest purveyor of terrorism on the planet? And so you have to be very careful of who you allow to define terms. We must take up the power of definition, Ashe? And that's what Dr. Marimba Ani has done in giving us the term Ma'afa. Now, what I'm about to get into is some deep stuff, y'all. It's going to be some real deep stuff. And as Dr. Naeem Akbar said, we are not here to cry stale tears for past injustices. But we are here to learn the truth about what happened, to shine the light on it so that we can use that light as a guide into the future. Ashe? One of my professors when I was a student at Clark Atlanta University said the past is to be learned from, not lived in. And yet many of us are still living in the trauma, the intergenerational, unaddressed trauma that has been passed down generation to generation. Ashe? Turn to your neighbor and say, break those chains. And so first we need to, now that we know that what the Ma'afa is, we need to know what reparations is. And in COBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America defines reparations as the process of repairing. Everybody say repairing. So repair is the root word of reparations. It's the process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights. Everybody say human rights. By governments or corporations. And we have Brother Jumoke Ifetayo with us today from Nkoba. Where is Brother? Yeah, raise your hand. Give him a round of applause, please. I always like to consult our community scholars who know the information, and certainly he has a wealth of information beyond what I do, and so he's somebody that all of us should know. But I need for you to understand when we talk about reparations, that reparations is not new. Ashe? And it hasn't just been applied to black people. As a matter of fact, guess what? The Japanese received reparations. Jews received reparations. Native Americans received reparations. And watch this, whites received reparations from this government. And so this notion of black people of any people receiving reparations is not a new thing. They treat it like it's a new thing when we talk about it. Ashe? Japanese received reparations after they were put in concentration camps during World War II in America. They didn't call them concentration camps. They called them internment camps. You see how they play the language games? Because concentration camps, that was the term used for Jews during the Holocaust in Germany, right? And so, of course, Jews have received reparations for that. And both the Japanese and Jews rightfully received reparations. Ashe? And then Native Americans, do you think Native Americans should have received reparations? Still have reparations due. They didn't get as much as they should have, but they did get something. Ashe? Watch this. We know that the Civil War was the war between the states. It was the war between the what? The North and the South. Another name for the North was the Union. Another name for the South was the Confederacy. The Confederate States held captive Africans and wanted to keep Africans captive. Ashe? Interesting thing, though, when the North or the Union forces won the Civil War, did you know that Confederate people in the Confederate States, the landholders, the slave owners, received reparations because of what they lost during the Civil War? Because of now that they didn't, because we were their property, and that was considered money, they got reparations for that. Why everybody want to get funny when we talk about reparations? Ashe? Is this making sense? And so in order for you to mount a proper reparations claim, you got to know the history and you have to know the research behind it. Who is needed for a complete understanding of reparations? Number one, you need some economists. Ashe? Because that's a whole lot of adding and multiplying that you need to do. And you need to factor in all of the different broader implications of what it meant for this country to get free labor for hundreds of years. So you need economists. I'm talking about trained economists. Ashe? In addition, you need psychologists who can tell you the mental and emotional toll that the Ma'afa has taken on our people. So, for example, Dr. Patricia Newton, a psychiatrist, came up with the concept of post-traumatic slave disorder, likening it to post-traumatic stress disorder, what happens to people when they go to war. Are y'all with me? It's a psychological condition. But then Dr. Joy DeGruy came along after that and said, and came out with post-traumatic slavery, who knows? Syndrome. And so when I met Dr. DeGruy, I said, what's the difference as a psychologist between a disorder and a syndrome? She said, Chike, she said, a syndrome is a series of disorders. We didn't just have one disorder as a result of this. We got a whole bunch of disorders. How many of y'all know some black folk who got some disorders? Ashe? All right? And by the way, we're all healing from this. There is nobody who can escape the intergenerational unaddressed trauma that we're dealing with today. Ashe? But then, not only did we have Dr. Patricia Newton and Dr. Joy DeGruy, then Dr. Kevin Washington, the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, said, wait a minute, when you say post-traumatic slavery disorder, post-traumatic slavery syndrome, post means after, and he said it's still going on. And every time something happens, it gets re-stimulated. Just like our brother who they had on trial, his murderer, what was it, yesterday or the day before, and we so sick, this is why we need the psychologists, we so sick, we hug our murderers. Turn to your neighbor and say, we need some help. Lord have mercy. You need medical and naturopathic doctors to tell you the damage that was done and that has been passed down. How did the healthiest people on the planet become the sickest people on the planet? And the reason that you need naturopathic doctors and medical doctors, when I was up in New York just this past weekend, I had the opportunity to go to the African burial ground. And when they exhumed those bones and they examined the bones, the European anthropologists and archaeologists were confused. They said, all we see are the bones of men. They had exhumed 15,000 of these corpses. And they said, all we see is the bones of men. Where were the women? Did they not bury their women? But then when the brothers and sisters from the archaeological team at Howard University came along and they examined the bones, they said, yes, there are women in here. There are just as many women as men. The problem is, when you looked at the bones, you thought that they were men because the women were worked just as hard as the men. The women and the men were literally worked to death. They were worked so hard that it changed the actual constitution of the bone structure. Are y'all with me this evening? And so you need medical doctors and naturopathic doctors to tell you why we suffer from obesity, from high blood pressure, from sugar diabetes, and all the things that have carried on over the years through unaddressed intergenerational trauma. Ashe? You need archaeologists who know how to do the job right, like the brothers and sisters at Howard University, who when they saw the Sankofa symbol on top of one of the coffins, they were able to piece together that these were African people who were trying to preserve their culture, and so they put Adinkra symbols on their coffins. Ashe? You need forensic anthropologists to do that same type of work of examining the bones. And then you need historians like myself, and you need educators, like myself, and trained historians who can tell the story and speak truth to power. Ashe? Speak truth to power. When I say speak truth to power, when other people say speak truth to power, they think that means speaking to white folks. I'm speaking truth to power right now because I'm talking to you because we got the power. Ashe? Turn to your neighbor and say, we got the power. Then you need attorneys and legislators. The reason you need attorneys and legislators is because attorneys know legal language. And how many of y'all know that legal language is very different than the average everyday language that you and I use today? And it's a very slick language, and if you don't know it, you could say one thing and have a completely different meaning. Ashe? And so you need attorneys and you need legislators and politicians who will advocate on our behalf. And I like what Dr. Claude Anderson said. He said, if you can't buy a politician, at least rent one. That's what everybody else does, Ashe? And so these are just a few of the people that we need in place to get this job done. So I have a few research questions I want to cover this evening, if you'll bear with me. What was the process and result of our enslavement? And then number two, what was the American, or in what ways, that should be ways, was the American economy affected by our enslavement? And then number three, what is the scope and scale of the damage to African people and humanity? See, most people don't know the damage that was done. If somebody broke into your house and the police came, one of the first things they want to know is, well, what was damaged? What was anything taken, right? We don't even know what was taken. And if you don't know the scope and the scale of what was taken, you can't make a proper demand to repair what was taken. Ashe? And by the way, Dr. Malana Karinga says this, the fact that you don't know the scope and scale of the damages is part of the damage. Number four, what Africans successfully resisted enslavement? All of us didn't lay down and accept enslavement. You need to learn about the Maroons, those Africans who resisted enslavement and threw off the chains and went and established their own Maroon communities and nations, Ashe? In the swamps of North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Florida, in the islands of the Caribbean, Central and South America, Ashe? There were a lot of Africans who fought back, but we haven't been taught that narrative. Not only did they fight back, they won. We've only been taught about the Africans that lost. And there's a reason for that. You need to check out Hidden Colors 5, Ashe? And so let me begin this by first talking about ancient black wealth. And this is important, brothers and sisters, because if you're not careful, if you don't know the narrative, if you don't know who you are and where you came from, people will have you to believe that you should just sit back and feel blessed that you were brought over here. Ashe? You ought to just give thanks that you're not still in Africa. This is what they would tell you, Ashe? And they'll have you thinking that they rescued you from jungles where you were throwing spears at one another, walking around with bones in your noses. Ashe? This is what they would have you to believe about yourself. They would have you to believe that Africa is poor, was poor, and has always been poor. But I need for you to understand, brothers and sisters, that African people have led the world in wealth creation. literary production, and scientific innovation. No thief comes to steal from somebody who's poor. I need for y'all to get that understanding in your mind and your spirit. Actually, I'm going to say that again. No thief comes to steal from somebody who is poor. And so once we get a few of these types of things understood, then we can take it to the next level. So black people led the world in wealth creation, literary production, and scientific innovation. If you're taking notes today, hint, hint, Ashe, if you're taking notes, write this down. Who were we prior to the Ma'afa? This is a continuous question we must ask ourselves. Who were we economically prior to the Ma'afa? Who were we in terms of our families and relationships prior to the Ma'afa? Who were we health-wise before the Ma'afa? Who were we, thank you, brother, religiously, I won't even say religiously, spiritually prior to the Ma'afa? Because anytime you want to go back and restore our people, you need to look at who we were prior to the terrorism of the Ma'afa, which was enacted upon us by Europeans. Ashe? And remember, it didn't stop. It's still what? Still going on. All right? And so I have to bring Brother Amos Wilson into the conversation, because what happens is when you start spitting the history to our people, people start to get caught up in their immediate circumstances. And they say things like, all that's good, Dr. Chike, but hey, I'm trying to pay the bills. I'm trying to pay the rent. I'm trying to pay the mortgage. I'm trying to pay the car note. I'm trying to feed these kids, right? All that history, that ain't got nothing to do with me now. All that ancient stuff, that ain't got nothing to do with me now. How many of y'all have heard this before? Why are you bringing that to me right now? I got other things on my mind. I want us to read this together. I'm going to read it, and I want you to read what's in bold and underlined. Here we go. If there were not a direct relationship between history and then why is it that the European rewrote history? Yeah, get a shot of that. Throw that up on Facebook. Throw that up on Instagram. Tweet that. Ashe? Dr. Amos Wilson, the falsification of African consciousness. We need to do that again. If there were not a direct relationship between history and then why is it that the European rewrote history? And see, if we don't understand that, and not only rewrote it, but wrote us out of it. Matter of fact, my research shows that our history either gets told incorrectly or it doesn't get told at all. One more time, our history gets told what? Incorrectly, or it doesn't get told. That's why we must be the ones to control the narrative. We must be the ones to control the narrative about our great ancient civilizations. We must be the ones to control the narrative about reparations. We must be the ones to control the narrative about the Ma'afa. We must be the ones to control the narrative about anything that has to do with us as a people. Ashe? Otherwise, in the absence of us doing it, other people will construct a narrative, and you might not like what they have to say. All right? And so how do powerful and proud Africans go from this to this? Well, here's one way. What you're looking at in the background is a diagram of slave ships. And Vincent Harding tells us in his book, There Is a River, that the slave ships had some very interesting names. Let's read the names of the slave ships. I can't hear you. Brotherhood, integrity, gift of God, liberty, and the good ship Jesus, my Lord. Look at the deep psychological maneuvering here. I mean, forget about the atrocity itself. How does a person work their mind to be involved in that atrocity, that terrorism, and name their ships things like this? Ashe? But let's go a step further. We're going to talk about 3 or 4 areas, and the first area that we're going to talk about is the massacre and the mutilation. That's the historical. And when we talk about the massacre and the mutilation, I need to give you a warning, brothers and sisters, because some people will try to pass this lie off on you, okay? There's no such thing as a good massa. I only got one ashe on that. I need to say it again. No, because there was a great deal of propaganda out there. Oh, Master treat us good over here. We get a little bit better food. We get a little bit better clothes. Ashe? You still got some people talking that today, but that's a whole nother story. But I need for you to understand there's no such thing as a good master. And see, people don't understand the nature. Just like you cannot fathom the greatness of the glory of the Most High, you cannot fathom the depths of evil that were done upon our people. Ashe? First, we were captured from the hinterland. The hinterland is the interior of Africa. And it took me a long time to get these arrows to move. So when they move, I need y'all to give me a strong round of applause, all right? But we were captured in the hinterland and marched hundreds of miles to the coast. And many of us died of dehydration and of starvation and exhaustion. Ashe? So we were marched in a coffle line. That's where we were tied together like that from the hinterland to the coast. Uh-oh, wait for it. Here it goes. Oh, give me a round of applause for that, y'all. That's some serious technology right there, all right? But in the process of being taken from the hinterland to the coast, many of us died on the way. Ashe? Dehydration, starvation, exhausted. And that's why Dr. Edward Robinson tells us that when you look at a black person, you're looking at the fittest of the fittest of the fit. Ashe? Somebody say, we are the children of those who chose to survive. And when I saw this picture, when I first came across this picture years ago, I'm looking at this brother with a net thrown over him, and I'm thinking, man, if that was me, I'd try to get out from under that net, and I would try to escape. But the brother who showed this to me, he said, wait a minute, you don't see what that is around his wrist right there. Because what he has around his wrist, this device has razor-sharp edges right here. So if he tries to get out of it, what does he do? He cuts his wrist, and then what happens? He bleeds to death. Ashe? And so not only that, you've heard before that if you were caught trying to learn to read, what would happen? They would what? They would cut off your fingers or cut off your hand. That wasn't just a myth. That wasn't just something that people said. We have all the evidence we need. Ashe? You see what happened to this brother right here? Again, no such thing as a good master. Now, they only did that for a period of time because, remember, this was about economics for them. So to cut the hands off meant that he couldn't work anymore. So after a while, they stopped doing that. But in the beginning, they did quite a bit of that. Ashe? Why? Because they were terrorizing us to set an example. And there are people who try to set an example too. When you start speaking out about certain injustices, never forget that the main reason we were brought here was for economic reasons. And so that's one of the first things they will try to withdraw when you start speaking truth. Ashe? We took this brother up on an Underground Railroad field trip all the way up to Canada so he could hold the chains and shackles of his ancestors. Ashe? And as you can see, they had chains and shackles not only for adults, they had chains and shackles for the children. And they still do to this day. Ashe? And this device right here, as you can see, goes around the neck. And if a person was trying to escape and they're running through the woods, they would get caught up in the underbrush. And oftentimes there would be a bell on here so that they couldn't run because the bell would ring and they could be heard. Ashe? And then we were branded. You see the branding iron here? And to the young people who don't know what a branding iron is, they put that in the fire, get it red hot, and press it on your arm, on your chest, on your face, so that it had the initials of the slave master. I didn't say slave master. I said what? Slave master. Y'all getting this? And so I need for you to understand the massacre and the mutilation. Now, one of the things that happens is oftentimes people try to say, well, wait a minute. Africans sold themselves into slavery. Would you raise your hand if you've heard that lie before? Can I just see a show of it? Keep your hand up. Look around the room. I'm not the only one who heard that, huh? Well, Malefi Asante makes it plain. He said, for example, in the Yoruba language, you have two words, azim and eru. Azim means servitude, and eru means slavery. Servitude is different than slavery. Servitude was a common practice wherein a parent might send their child to apprentice under somebody for a period of time. So my friend Kamau Kevin Parker is here today. He's an amazing photographer. I sent my son to apprentice under him, to learn from him, and now he's becoming a master photographer himself. Ashe? And so that's very different than slavery. But not only that, here's something else he tells us. African people were singled out for enslavement on a scale that had never been seen before. The European slave trade began the largest forced migration in the history of the world. Ashe? In addition, he says Europeans engaged in the immoral and ruthless enslavement of Africans for one single purpose. What was it, everybody? Economic profit. Europeans invented the false argument that Africans were inferior and deserved this cruel and unrelenting enslavement. The enslavement of Africans by Europeans became, let's read it together, 1, 2, 3, read, the most prolonged instance of inhumanity ever practiced against any race of people. The effects of enslavement are still with us to this day. All right. Now, how many of y'all are learning something right now? Let me see a show of hands. All right. Get your phones ready because I have a free gift for you. And some of y'all have already bought books and DVDs. I appreciate your support and everything. That helps us to do what we do. But here's your free gift. And this is a free online course. 6 free videos. Go to freeintro-to-africanorigins.com. Get a picture of it real quick because I got to move fast and go to the next slide here. freeintro-to-africanorigins.com. Again, that's 6 video modules that will be delivered to you one day after the other over a course of 6 days for you to continue studying about our history and culture. Ashe? Now, how many of y'all going to take advantage of that? All right, wonderful. Can you promise me to share that with somebody else as well? All right, so now, we need to still look at this question of resistance because we have not been taught resistance history. We didn't just lay down and accept our condition. You had people like, for example, Queen Nzinga of Angola, who fought off the Portuguese. You have Yaa Asantewaa, Queen of the Ashanti, who fought off the British. Ashe? Herbert Aptheker did a book where he documented over 250 documented rebellions. And so from that, listen carefully, from that and other critical research literature, we can determine that African people, that there was, first of all, that there was a revolt, probably almost one a year. Ashe? Somewhere in these United States, there was a revolt going on, almost one a year. But not only that, we were always either planning a revolt, in the midst of a revolt, or coming out of a revolt. One more time. We were either what? Planning a revolt, in the midst of a revolt, or coming out of a revolt. We did not lay down and accept this. Ashe? If you have not seen the incredible documentary 1804, which Brother Tariq Nasheed produced, you need to see that, where you will learn about Dessalines and Toussaint and Boukman. These Africans from Haiti led one of the greatest revolutions that the world has ever known. And Haiti is still suffering for that today. Ashe? And so we have to repair Haiti also. All right, so we have a serious resistance history. But what's going on here is I was working on my doctoral dissertation several years ago, and I'm looking at all of this data about the miseducation of our people, about the intentional control of the narrative of our history, or completely leaving us out of the history. Some serious patterns began to emerge. When you collect data, when you gather information and you review that data, certain patterns emerge. And from those patterns, I developed a theory called selective memory manipulation. Everybody say selective? Memory manipulation. Now, those are just some big sounding words to say the process of strategically limiting or eliminating certain cultural memories. Some of our memories have been strategically limited or eliminated. Somebody say, break that down. As an individual, if you lose your history, you lose your mind. If you lose your memory as an individual, you lose your mind. They call it Alzheimer's disease. They call it dementia. Ashe? If you lose your memory as an individual, you lose your mind. If you lost your memory, you wouldn't even know why you were in here. You wouldn't know what to do. You wouldn't know where to go. You wouldn't know where you parked. You wouldn't even know that you had a car. Or you wouldn't know how to get to MATA or however you got here. Ashe? You wouldn't know who you are. You wouldn't know where you come from. And you wouldn't know where you're going. Anybody know some black people like that? So if you lose your memory, you lose your mind as an individual. What happens when a group of people lose their memory? That group of people lose their mind. Raise your hand if you've ever seen some black people who act like they have lost their ever-loving mind. Ashe? And this is what has happened to us, selective memory manipulation. Certain memories have been selected for us and then injected, selected and injected into us. Ashe? So now that we've talked just a little bit about the mutilation, and a whole presentation could just be done on that, but we got to get to the money behind the madness. This is where it gets really deep. The mutilization, we were talking about the historical, now we're going to talk about the financial. Because most people have no idea the incredible amounts of money that were made, that made America a world superpower in a very, very relatively short period of time. Ashe? And so I came across the work of John W. Jones in a book called The Color of Money, where as an artist, he went back and he found currency, banknotes, from prior to the Civil War. Ashe? And when he looked at these and he repainted them exactly as they were, this is the Farmers and Exchange Bank $10 bill. But if you look really, really carefully in the bottom right-hand corner, can you see let me blow that up if I can. Can you see what's going on there? Oh, wait a minute. We on the money. Black people, you on the money. This is deeply symbolic. They're saying you are the economic backbone of this country. And you are still the economic backbone of this nation because we are the greatest consumers in this nation. But it wasn't just the Farmers and Exchange Bank of Charleston, South Carolina. We have many examples. Look at the Central Bank of Alabama. Do you see anything strange there? Wait a minute, look in the bottom left-hand corner. Let's blow that up and let's see what's going on here. Oh man, we just skinning and grinning. Glad to be carrying the bale of hay. Do you see how we're portrayed? On the money. Then when we go a little further, we see the state of Georgia, Atlantic and Gulf Railroad Company. Uh-oh, look at what's going on in the upper right-hand corner there. Can you see it, everybody? It was on the money. They're telling you symbolically how important you are to the economy of America. Plantation Bank of New York, and I just told you about New York. Some people say, oh man, New York, I thought that was in the North. You know, I thought slavery was in the South. Malcolm X said, as long as you're south of the Canadian border, you in the South. Ashe? But look at what's going on here. Now you got to look real close in the middle there. Can you see it? Right there? Oh wait, let me see if I can blow it up for you. Oh, we just having a party. We just having a good old time, right? They try to portray it as if we were just having a good time. And as if we should just feel blessed to be brought here. Ashe? And so, some people think that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. That's not incorrect, but it's incomplete. Ashe? So let's look at what it says. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except, everybody say except, as punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall be duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So what it's saying here is we're going to abolish slavery, what? Except unless you have been convicted of a crime. Which means if you've been convicted of a crime, oh, guess what? You're ripe, ready, and vulnerable to be enslaved once again. Ashe? And so what begins to happen then is we begin to see the same type of treatment going on in the prison industrial complex because people get paid from our incarceration. Ashe? People get paid from our incarceration. Blacks are 12% of the U.S. population, but over 35% of the prison population. Just back in 2009, the prison industry generated $34 billion. Ashe? America spends $80 billion annually to incarcerate people. And you should look up, you all do know that prisons are privately owned now. And you do know that you can invest in prisons. Did you know you can go on the New York Stock Exchange and you can invest in prisons? What does that mean? If I'm an investor, that means every time you get locked up, I get paid. Every time one of us gets locked up, somebody's getting paid. Who's getting paid? The person that made the flip-flops that the prisoners wear, they getting paid. The company that makes the orange jumpsuits, they getting paid. The people that make the bars, they getting paid. The people that make the locks, they getting paid. The people that make the keys, they getting paid. The people that make the surveillance cameras, they getting paid. Ashe? Everybody getting paid but us. Except in some cases where we get paid to watch our own people be incarcerated. Ashe? Now, I have another opportunity for you, brothers and sisters. Take your phone out again, because if you're learning something and you want to find out when and where I'm doing other lectures and things like this, take a picture of this real quick and text Dr. Akua to 22828. That will put you in our database, and I appreciate you signing our list. We want to make sure that we can keep in contact with you. Ashe? Because we want to make sure we can get this information to you whenever we're doing a presentation. All right? Over 85% of America's wealth was tied up in our captivity. Over 85%. Now, this is where it gets really deep, y'all, because Walter Rodney, in his famous book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, describes how slave trading companies of Europe created economic opportunities for merchants and entrepreneurs. Now, it's amazing when you start doing research. So you run into things that you had no idea about, that you couldn't even have predicted. And when I started doing research on this, I started finding out that many of the large companies that are still in existence today have their roots in slavery. So in my research, I found out about a guy named John Cadbury. So that name sounds familiar, Cadbury. When you think Cadbury, what do you think of? Right, yeah, and in particular, what time of year they start showing these commercials? Cadbury's Easter Bunny chocolates and so forth like that. Well, let's see who John Cadbury was. The famous Cadbury chocolates of England can be traced back to the time when the Englishman John Cadbury served as head of the Ghana Cocoa Company. In other words, the British went into Ghana and they've set up a company called the Ghana Cocoa Company in West Africa. In addition, Britain used its entry into the slave trading business as a way to control the local government in Ghana. It succeeded, and Cadbury was put in charge of cocoa. Ashe? Is this making sense? Let's take it a step further. Firestone. Did you know Firestone Tire and Rubber Company at one time owned 1 million acres of rubber tree plantations in Liberia? And by the way, Firestone doesn't just make tires. They make all sorts of different things that they're profiting from that make them a multi-million-dollar a year industry. Ashe? But now let's take it a step further, because now I hope you know where to get your tires or not to get your tires from next time. Ashe? Uh-oh. Oh, wait a minute. Now it's getting personal. Now it's getting personal. The Hershey Company, on February 2nd, 2012, dailyfinance.com reported that Hershey has fallen behind its rivals in addressing abusive practices in the cocoa industry. According to the ILRF, 40%, what percent? 40% of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa's Ivory Coast. The Department of State estimates that what? 109,000 children work under the worst forms of child labor there, suffering abuses such as beatings, as well as enduring long hours, having to utilize dangerous work tools, being exposed to pesticides and brutal weather conditions for cocoa production. Meanwhile, 10,000 Ivory Coast children are subjected to human trafficking and even slavery. Next time you see some Hershey's Kisses, you might want to pass them up. Ashe? Because for us, it's the kiss of death. Ashe? But wait a minute, hold on. Hershey is not just the Hershey bar. What else do they make? Uh-oh. Oh, man. Oh, damn. Whoa, wait a minute. Oh, bruh, what? Oh, my goodness. Do you see? Now, see, here's the thing, y'all. One of the most effective manipulative tricks that the oppressor plays on the oppressed is to get the oppressed to participate in their own oppression. One more time, one of the tricks that the oppressor plays on the oppressed is to get the oppressed to participate in their own oppression. And you participate in your own oppression by supporting companies that are enslaving your own people. Ashe? You putting their kids through college while you trying to figure out how you gonna get your children to college. You buying other folks' homes when you trying to figure out how to hang on to your own home. Ashe? You buying other folks' cars while you trying to figure out why you can't get a car loan. Ashe? Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Oh, man. I done messed up somebody real bad this evening. I know. Oh, no. What? Lord have mercy. It's deep, y'all. It gets real deep. It gets real deep. It gets deep. But wait a minute. Now, you know what they say, if you want to buy your sweetheart some chocolates, you don't want to just get some of this stuff. You want to buy those high-end chocolates. What kind of chocolates are those? Ghirardelli? Okay, what's another one? I can't hear you. Godiva. Well, wait a minute. Let's look at Godiva. Can we do a little research on Godiva for just a minute? I see somebody closing out like, no, don't show me, Brother Chike. The truth is painful sometimes, but wait a minute. Look at it carefully. Look at it carefully. Godiva, Belgium, 1926 is when it was founded. Okay, so now we got to put this in historical context. I'm going to ask you what you're going to think is a very silly question, but I want y'all to just bear with me. Ashe? Have you ever heard of Adolf Hitler? Okay, and we know that he committed crimes against humanity by putting Jews in ovens. Ashe? 6 million of them. Ashe? Now raise your hand if you have heard that narrative before. You've heard that story before. Ashe? Okay, hands down. Now, this is a conscious group, so y'all may have heard of this before, but how many of y'all are familiar with King Leopold? Okay, so like I said, this is a conscious group, so y'all know, but most places I go, they don't know. King Leopold was the monarch of Belgium. And when he was the monarch of Belgium, let's look at what he was doing to the children. So Godiva is telling you where they originated and where they're getting, they didn't get their chocolate in Belgium. You know they got their chocolate in West Africa, Ashe? And so they called it the Belgian Congo at the time, all right? So this is what he was doing to the children. If you refused to work or you were disobedient in any way, do you know that there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of children who had their hands cut off? Ashe? I'm going to ask you to think twice next time you think about getting some Godiva chocolates. Ashe? But wait a minute. Can we talk about insurance for just a moment? Can we talk about the fact that the insurance industry started as a result of the Ma'afa? This is an industry that started as a result of businessmen trying to protect their investments in human cargo, enslaved captive Africans. And so several of those companies are still in existence. One is Aetna. Now watch this. Aetna, the nation's largest health insurer, apologized for selling policies in the what? 1850s that reimbursed slave owners for financial losses when their slaves died. So they took out an insurance policy on you. Watch what they say. Aetna has long acknowledged that for several years, shortly after its founding in 1853, that's my best white voice, all right, that the company may have insured the lives of slaves, said Aetna spokesman Fred Labarge. We express our deep regret over any participation at all in this deplorable practice. Aetna, now wait a minute. See, apology is one thing, atonement is another. One more time, apology is one thing, and that's important. But atonement is another. Well, what's that? Well, I can explain it simple enough for a first grader to understand it. If I take you a pencil and I break your pencil, and then I come back and I say, I'm sorry I took your pencil, and I'm sorry I broke your pencil. That's an apology. But what is atonement? Give me another pencil. Ashe? So look at what he says. Aetna, which noted that the slave policies were legal, now they're trying to justify it. Well, it was legal back then. It was legal before slavery was abolished, said it plans to make? No. I can't hear you. No. One more time? No. We have concluded that no further actions are required at this time. What the hell? We have concluded. That's like when they say, well, like when there's an act of police brutality, we have studied ourselves, we have examined ourselves and found ourselves to be not guilty. Ashe? So you got to know the history to mount an effective claim. And we're not waiting for somebody else to do that for us. Ashe, how about New York Life? Okay? Fortune 100 company founded in? Now this is not Dr. Akua talking, this is the New York Times. Rachel Swarns. Sales were sluggish that year, so the company looked south. There in Richmond, Virginia, an enterprising New York Life agent sold more than 30 policies in a single day in February 1846. Soon, advertisements began appearing in newspapers from Wilmington, North Carolina to Louisville as the New York-based company encouraged Southerners to buy insurance to protect their most precious commodity, enslaved, captive Africans. Yeah, get a shot of that. Throw that up on Instagram. Tweet that. Ashe? We profoundly regret that in the 1840s, our predecessor company, Nautilus Insurance Company, insured the lives of slaves for a brief period of time. Kevin Hine, a spokesman for the company, said in a written statement, while we cannot change our history, our longstanding recognition of it helps shape our commitment to the African American community. Commitment? Did you get your check from New York Life? Have you received your reparations? And by the way, it shouldn't just be in the form of a check. Matter of fact, we don't want a check. Well, I won't say, it's not that I won't accept a check. We don't want just a check. Dr. Rosie Milligan said if they were smart, they would give us reparations in the form of a check today because we so messed up in the head, we turn around and give it right back to them. So we don't want just a check. That's a whole nother conversation. But wait a minute, banks too. Uh-oh. Banks absorbed by J.P. Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo allows, are these names sounding familiar to you? Allowed Southerners seeking loans to use their slaves as collateral and took possession of some of them when their owners defaulted. Ashe? All history, as John Henrik Clarke says, all history is a current event. Here are some fundamental questions when somebody tries to say that Africans sold themselves into slavery. Molefi Asante says, who traveled to Africa in search of captives? Somebody say who? Who created an entire industry of shipbuilding, insurance, outfitting of crews and ships, and banking based on the slave trade? Who? Who benefited enormously from the evil and vile project of human kidnapping? Get a shot of that. I got to move fast. If you're trying to get a shot of it, get it real quick because I got to keep moving. But here are the fundamental facts, y'all. No African kingdoms use slavery as a principal mode of production. Africa has produced no economies based on slavery. Ashe? If you want the article where he wrote this, I want you to Google Henry Louis Gates is wrong about slavery. I really appreciate that title that Dr. Asante gave to that article because Professor Gates was trying to make it appear as if Africans sold themselves into slavery and without all of the facts. No African kingdoms use slavery as a principal mode of production. Africa has produced no economies based on slavery. But this is where it really gets deep. In all massive enterprises where there are oppressors and the oppressed, there will be collaborators. And he goes on to say, don't mistake the collaborator for the perpetrator. They try to shift the focus on the collaborator and say, yeah, Africans sold themselves into slavery. Well, we know that there were some who participated in it. But don't mistake the collaborator for the perpetrator. We want to make sure we continue to shine the light on the perpetrator. And this isn't just African people. Did you know that there were Native American collaborators who collaborated with Europeans in the Native American genocide? Ashe? Did you know there were Japanese collaborators? Did you know that there were Jewish collaborators in the Holocaust? But no one would dare say that they were responsible for their own Holocaust. Why is it that the people seem to feel so comfortable saying that you sold your own people into slavery? Ashe? Don't mistake the collaborators for the perpetrators. Ashe? Europeans built ships, sold insurance on the ships and their voyages, gave financial backing to the captains, outfitted the sailors, armed traders, and used the money generated by the enslavement of Africans for investment in other businesses in Europe. Brothers and sisters, when we broach this topic, we got to go in deep. We can't tell half the story because we want to make some people feel good. We can't just tell half the story because we don't want some people to feel bad about that. Ashe? We got to tell the whole truth. And what? Nothing but the truth. Ashe? And so when we look at this, as we go a step further, we know that we were sold from the auction block. And the last thing we want to touch on this evening is the message and the meaning. We've looked at the massacre and the mutilation. We've looked at the money behind the madness. And now we need to look at the message and the meaning. Have you ever asked yourself why the Most High would allow us to go through something like this? As I mentioned before, Dr. Marion Dinkins says the past is to be learned from, not lived in. And so we have to examine the message and the meaning behind this horrific, terroristic event. Henry Berry, a delegate to the Virginia House of Representatives back in the 1700s, said, "We have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which light may enter into the slave's mind." If we could extinguish the capacity to see light, our work would be complete. They would then be on the level of the beast of the field, and we should be safe. In other words, if we can keep them ignorant, if we can keep them vibrating at the nigger frequency, if we can keep them completely unconscious, if we can make sure that they don't get woke. And sometimes we get woke and then we hit the snooze button and go right back to sleep. Ashe? Several years ago, I was asked to speak at the Biomedical Symposium at Tuskegee University, and Dr. Rick Kittles of African ancestry was there. And Dr. Rick Kittles, in case you don't know, is the geneticist who did the DNA testing of Oprah Winfrey, Bishop T.D. Jakes, Quincy Jones, comedian Chris Tucker, and many others. And he was featured in the documentary Finding Oprah's Roots. And he was one of the other keynote presenters. And I got a chance to speak with Dr. Kittles. And in founding AfricanAncestry.com, he wanted to create a company where black people could get their DNA tested and find out specifically where they come from in Africa. Ashe? And he said, "Brother Chike, you would be amazed at the amount of money that I was offered to turn over black people's DNA." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Ours is the only company that when we test your DNA, we then destroy it. All the other companies doing DNA testing turn your DNA over to third parties." I said, "What do you mean third parties?" He said, "Government agencies, pharmaceutical companies, everybody studying us but us." Ashe? So if you decide to get your DNA tested, make sure that you go through AfricanAncestry.com. Ashe? Not only that, it's much more comprehensive what they will give you in return. And so I've had the opportunity to go to West Africa and had the opportunity to travel to Elmina and Cape Coast. Now, the Europeans refer to these places as castles. We refer to them as dungeons. Ashe? Very, very, very important. Again, language games. Language makes a difference. And so here we are with a group, and we're standing at the Cape Coast dungeon. All right? And here is the door of no return. This young brother and this gentleman standing in front of the door of no return. And of course, it's called that because once these Africans were leaving from the dungeons and went out that door, it leads to the beach, which leads to the ships, and many of them never expected to return. But now they're calling it the door of return because more Africans are coming back to the continent. How many of y'all have been? Let me see a show of hands. Keep your hands up, look around the room. That's a good number of people in here, right? And if you haven't been, you should go. Next summer, I'm leading another trip called Majesty of the Moors on Tour. We're going to Morocco, Spain, and Senegal, all right? And we're going to visit some of these very, very important places. So if you haven't been, you should go, all right? As we go a little bit further, this is Elmina. And Elmina in Portuguese means the mine. And in a mine, the concept is that there is gold, and guess who was the gold? Our ancestors, us. Everybody say us. Now, this is a building in the center of the courtyard at Elmina. Do you know what that building is? It's a church. It's a church. And the reason it's a church is because, as Tony Browder tells us, that when the Europeans came, they sent in missionaries and mercenaries. I added merchants. They sent in the missionaries to soften the hearts of the people, knowing that we are a deeply spiritual people. And if they could work on our minds and our spirits enough, they might even have us hugging them after we've been brutalized. Ashe? This is a deeply problematic picture, by the way. You know what this is leading up to right here. Ashe? So they sent in the missionaries to soften the hearts of the people. They sent in the merchants to control the money. And then they sent in the mercenaries. And what's a mercenary? A soldier of fortune to subdue the people. Ashe? Most people don't know the narrative. That's why we got to reconstruct the narrative. This is standing on top of a catwalk looking down into the female dungeon courtyard. Because the slave master would stand over and look over into the courtyard, choose a captive African woman, and then bring her up this trapdoor staircase and have her washed off, and I don't have to tell you what happens next after that. Ashe? I mean, going to Elmina and Cape Coast was a horrifying experience. It was a necessary experience because you come face to face with your ancestors. Ashe? They tell you when you go inside those dungeons, be careful because it's slippery. Why is it slippery? Because you're standing on top of 400 years of compacted feces. The dungeons were never cleaned out. So you're standing on top of 400 years of compacted urination, defecation, and in the female dungeon, menstruation. And you can smell all that too. And it's hot. And so what's interesting is going through this experience, you come face to face with your ancestors, and you got to watch people because we have spiritual reactions to this. And so I was helping to lead the tour, and I had a couple of moments myself, and one of the brothers who was leading the tour said, "Chike, how you doing?" I said, "Man," because we had went to Egypt and then Ghana. And I said, "Baba, we've gone from the cradle of civilization to the scene of the crime." Ashe? And so one of our guides, Nana Kwa David Whitaker, who is an attorney and educator from Cleveland, who's been installed as a chief in Ghana, we were absolutely wiped out. It was about 150 people in our group. It's about 95, 100 degrees out there. We're emotionally drained and spiritually just done. And he said something very interesting. He said, "For those of you who want an additional experience, I want you to meet us on the other side of the courtyard." He said, "I know you're tired. I know you're hungry. But if you want an additional experience, meet us on the other side of the courtyard." I said, "Well, what are we going to do?" He said, "I'm not going to tell you that. But if you want to meet," well, I could not go, right? So I went over there. About 60 of us went over there. And when we went over there, this is what the door looked like. And he opened it up, and he said, "Come on in. This is the freedom fighters' dungeon." As you can see, the skull and crossbones above it, the loud, the outspoken, the leaders amongst the Africans were put in this dungeon to die. And he put 60 of us inside of there. We were crammed shoulder to shoulder. And then he closed the door. He was in there with us, and he opened up his laptop. And he played a brief excerpt from a sermon by Dr. Jeremiah Wright, a sermon called What Makes You So Strong. And in that sermon, Dr. Wright says, what makes you so strong, black man? How is it that after 400 years of degradation and segregation, still you keep coming on? How is it that you're able to produce a Booker T. Washington and a Marcus Garvey? How is it that you're able to produce a Malcolm X and a Martin Luther King? How is it that you're able to produce a Thurgood Marshall? What makes you so strong, black man? And what makes you so strong, black woman, after you've been lied on and lied upon, after you've been raped and robbed? How is it that you're able to produce an Ida B. Wells, a Sojourner Truth, an Araminta Harriet Tubman? What makes you so strong, black woman? What makes you so strong, black people? How is it that you still keep coming on? And after this 2 to 3 minute excerpt of this sermon, now your sweat is being mixed with your tears, because now you're beginning to understand where you're standing. Ashe? And all during that trip, in the days leading up to it, Nana Kwa David Whitaker had us to sing Lift Every Voice, right? The Black National Anthem. And we would practice that every morning. We thought we were going to sing it for children in the village or something like that. And after that excerpt from Dr. Wright's sermon, he said, now we're going to sing Lift Every Voice to our ancestors. And let me tell you, standing there in the dark, singing Lift Every Voice, pouring with sweat and tears and understanding, I had an instant awakening. And in that instant awakening, what I realized is the miracle of the Ma'afa. The miracle of the Ma'afa is you and me. We were never meant to survive that atrocity. We were never meant to come out of it with our minds intact. We were never meant to come out with the consciousness to even want to return. Ashe? And so one of the things that I'm reminded of is the powerful words of Julie Dash when she says, we are the children of those who chose to survive. You see, growing up and going to church, the preacher would say, greater love has no man than that he would give his life for his friend. Ashe, you heard that before? But what does it mean to refuse to die? To refuse to die after the rape, after the castration, after the family separation, after the daily terrorism. To refuse to die. We are here because someone refused to die. Ashe? Give yourselves a round of applause. We bad, y'all. We are amazing. Turn to your neighbor and say, I see the God in you. Now turn to the one on the other side and say, I see the God in you. Turn to the one on the other side and say, you have the face of God, and God looks good on you. Yes. So as I close, brothers and sisters, every time you see a black person, you're looking at a miracle. You are literally looking at a miracle. Every time you see a functional black male-female relationship, you are looking at a miracle. Every time you see an intact black family, you are looking at a miracle, because this society did everything it possibly could to separate black families. You know why? Because they studied us very carefully, and what they discovered was, these great black civilizations are held together by strong families. Strong families that became dynasties that ruled for centuries. One more time. It was strong, what? Families who became dynasties. A dynasty is a family that rules for decades. So strong families that then became what? Dynasties that ruled for centuries. So how do we break the back of these great African civilizations? The least common denomination of a strong family is the man and the woman. So we must create division between the black man and the black woman. Ashe? And so now what happens is our families get torn apart. As a matter of fact, brothers and sisters, did you know that there were about 6 or 7 families, for example, in ancient Kemet who ruled for over 1,000 years? What kind of family would you have to rule, to be one of those 6 or 7 families that ruled for 1,000 years? Think about your family right now. I told my wife and my sons, I said, we are on a 500 to 1,000 year project. The work that we are doing, writing, publishing, producing books, DVDs, now online curricula, will have a 1,000-year impact on our people and on humanity. Ashe? That's what we go to bed with every night. That's what we wake up to every morning. Ashe? This is a picture of me and my queen. This year we celebrate our 25-year wedding anniversary. Please give us a round of applause. Everybody say, black love is black power. We've been blessed with 2 wonderful sons, Jabari and Amari, and as I said, they are amazing at what they do. Amari is an incredible photographer and videographer, an award-winning filmmaker. And Jabari is now studying in his 2nd year in college in computer engineering and game design. So now we're going to be producing multimedia African consciousness. Ashe? And so, brothers and sisters, as I close, Julie Dash said, we are the children of those who chose to survive. Nana Kwa David Whitaker said, we are here because someone refused to die. One of the things that I oftentimes tell my students, whether they're in whatever level they're on, elementary, middle, high school, college, America has both tremendous opportunity and profound, deeply rooted, and deeply structured inequality. So you got opportunity on the one hand, inequality on the other. Our task as conscious and committed citizens is to take advantage of the opportunities and transform the inequities. Ashe? And when we do that, we will then understand the powerful words of Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, never forget where you came from, and always praise the bridges that carried you over. And James Baldwin, who said, our crowns have been bought and paid for. All we have to do is put them on our heads. Thank you. Peace and blessings. Thank you. If you want the information in tonight's lecture, the name of the DVD is The Miracle of the Maafa. We don't have enough for everybody, but we do have a few of them available along with some of the other titles. Thank you all so much for coming out, and thank you all so much